it would require that any state chartered bank no longer make any investments or loans to private prison companies going forward.
For you, has a sponsor spoke to anybody in the banking industry about this particular piece of legislation and how it would affect state chartered banks?
Through you, Madam President, no, I did not. However, this bill has been widely circulated for over a month. We reached out to state chartered banks, and we have heard nothing. So I'm left to assume that this is not something that they find to be that harmful to them. But I want to add something because how I found out about this bill, what this bill's origin, J.P. Morgan Chase, a well-known bank, an international bank, they actually came out and said that they will no longer lend or invest in private prisons. Matter of fact, if you don't mind, I would like to read a quote from the spokesman of J.P. Morgan Chase, and it was said specifically, "The company has a robust and well-established process to evaluate the sectors that they serve. As part of this process, they will no longer bank the private prison industry." So it seems to me that clearly there are banks that are actually believing in the moral obligations of our private institutions to not cage humans and profit from doing that. So for me, I think it is important to acknowledge that there are some private banks that are saying, you know what, this is the right thing to do. We should be moving in this direction. One of the things that I've had an issue with private prisons for a long time, I believe that they facilitate mass incarceration for a very simple purpose. I went to business school, Madam President, and in business school, you learn that one of the most important parts of a private business is to grow that business. It has come, so that leads me to the natural conclusion that if I am running a private prison, my main order of business is to grow that business. How do I grow a private prison business? I have to incarcerate more people. I have to either have less costs with the same amount of people or have more people. Actually, ideally, you have more people, less costs. And so for me, when you talk about incarceration, that is not something that I believe the private industry should be a part of. That is something that I believe should be done by the public sector. The goal should be rehabilitation, not punishment and profiteering.
How many for-profit prisons do we have in New York State?
Madam President, we have no for-profit prisons presently in New York State.
Madam President, through you, the sponsor will continue to yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, I will.
The sponsor yields.
So we have no for-profit prisons in the state of New York. Do you know how many people are incarcerated then nationally in prisons that are run by contractors?
My understanding, Madam President, 9% of the prison population of this country is in private, sort of run by private prison contractors.
I'm sorry, was it 9%?
I said 9%.
9%.
That's my understanding. Do you have a different understanding? Can I ask him?
No.
Will the senator yield for a question?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Does the senator yield?
I do.
Senator yields.
Do you believe that the private prison industry is a good industry?
Senator, I haven't given it much thought. I think to your point, I thought the number was 10%. You're saying it's 9%. Okay. The fact that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are incarcerated, and only 9% of them are in for-profit prisons, I think is a good thing. I'm not suggesting for-profit prisons are good, they're bad. Again, I haven't given it much thought. So I think the sponsor, Madam President, through you, hit on this, but my question to the sponsor is do you believe that for-profit prisons are driving incarceration rates?
Through you, Madam President, I believe that private prisons have a bad incentive to drive mass incarceration. I believe I want to add to that, whether it's 9% or 10% of the prison population is in private prisons. From my understanding, somewhere around 75% of immigrant detainees right now are in private prisons. So that is moving in the wrong direction, and you can check those facts. But that's my understanding of it. And obviously, when you have zero tolerance policies and separating children from their parents at the borders, and I think that that's very complicated, and that has to be addressed more thoroughly. But for me, private prisons, if I am in the marketing department of a private prison, my job is to figure out how to have more people incarcerated, to have stiffer penalties for low-level offenses or any other offense, and that's how I make my living, right? I mean, when President Trump got elected, the private prison companies, the two big ones, their stocks exploded. Some accounts was 30 to 40%. Obviously, they had the shareholders had some assumption that those businesses would grow. And for me, we should not be in the business. There should not be profiteering and shareholder value conversations around incarceration and furthering more mass incarceration. We've heard of some of the cases where there have been some judges who have been bribed. They've been bribed by some of these companies. We've heard of cases where there have been donations that have been given to political elected officials with the argument that I'm assuming they're given because they want to facilitate their business. Otherwise, they would be hurting their shareholders and their shareholder value. So for me, we should not be in the private prison business. And so as far as I'm concerned, New York State should not do anything to help this industry move forward.
How many state chartered banks are currently investing in for-profit prisons?
Through you, Madam President, I don't know the specific answer to that. But what I do know is that I don't want them to do that going forward. So what could be happening with a few, which I don't believe is which is a lot, if it is, this bill is about the future. It's about where we're going as a society. And so the real issue is making sure that state chartered banks don't have any investments going forward. This is a looking forward bill, not a looking backward bill.
Who runs the prisons in the state of New York?
Our prisons are state run.
So, to the sponsor, through you, Madam President, is this bill more about politics, or is it more about regulating the for-profit prison industry? You just made mention in that answer to my previous question. You talked about Trump being elected. You talked about illegal detainees being held at certain locations. So is this bill more focused on addressing things happening at the national level, or is it really have everything to do with what state chartered banks are doing?
Through you, Madam President, this bill is not about national politics. I was just referencing that based on your question about the size of private prisons in this country. What this bill is about, I think there's a moral element to this, and there's a policy element to this. As far as I'm concerned, mass incarceration has huge implications on our economy. I believe that we over-incarcerate as it relates to public safety, and as a result, we have individuals who are presently incarcerated and who should not have been or are over-incarcerated. That has implications for society. It has bad implications for particularly communities of color, and it has bad implications for our families. And so for me, that to me is the main driver of why I'm very committed to trying to stop the private prison industry from increasing. I actually want it to decrease and actually end. We should not have any private contractors. There should be no affiliation with governments, whether it's state, city, or federal. But I do know that J.P. Morgan Chase actually proactively put it on itself. And my understanding is that Wells Fargo has also agreed to do this as well. And there's a lot of action. Groups like Make the Road and others are actively working on getting other banks to do the same thing. So I'm not aware of any federal prohibition. I doubt that we can expect any with the present administration. But hopefully in the future there might be some federal prohibitions.
Does the sponsor believe that state prisons in the state of New York, those that are run by the public, do you think they do a better job than privately run prisons that are run throughout the nation?
Through you, Madam President, I believe with any flaws that occur in our state state prison run system, I believe that the state is not incentivized for incarceration. I believe that's a very fundamental point that you can't run away from. We need to have in our prison industry, which quite frankly should be more focused on rehabilitation than on profiteering and punishment. We need to have the public sector running the prison industry. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. I can't think of anything perfect in any sector, public or private. So I think that's kind of besides the point. I think the real issue is, as a society, should people be making millions of dollars off of incarceration of fellow citizens? I believe the answer is no. I don't even know why this is so controversial, to be frank. I mean, to me, I think we all should say to ourselves, okay, should people go into work every day and say to themselves, what can I do to incarcerate more people? I think the answer is no. And so for me, I believe that this is a moral issue, and I think that New York State rightly stopped investing stopped investing our city controller and our state controller. They rightly pulled out of investing in private prison companies. And I believe it is only logical to now say, wait a second, state chartered banks, they should, that we license, we do this. They should not be investing in private prisons. And I would also just add, JP Morgan Chase, pretty big bank. I heard Wells Fargo told folks in Capitol Hill, Congressman Maloney, they're going to get out of it too. So it's not as if somehow this is destroying private business or destroying our banks. Matter of fact, I think it's a moral statement that we can make to say, you know what? We're going to do the right thing. And we're going to acknowledge that some industries should not be in private hands. And I went to business school, Madam President. It's not like, I was trained on business. And I'm saying to you, the mindsets that drive those who run businesses is about growing revenue, shrinking costs, building operating margins, delivering net income for shareholders. That's the mindset. And in this industry, the product is people and incarceration. How can we sit here and say, oh yeah, let's try to make an argument that we should keep doing this stuff? I don't know, but listen, I will happily answer all the questions because I have a lot of respect for my colleague, but I will say when it comes to the issue of whether we should be in the private prison industry, because there's an argument to be made that our public prisons have issues here or there. I think we have issues everywhere, but I don't believe that we should be privatizing incarceration. Madam President, I just wanted to thank our Majority Leader, Senator Andrew Stewart Cousins, for bringing this bill to the floor. I want to thank my colleagues for being a part of this conversation. To me, we do need to remember that people drive the state. And, to have a state charter is a privilege. It's not a right. And I think that along with that, there should be certain requirements that we have as a society, one of which I feel very passionately about, which is not furthering mass incarceration for mass incarceration's sake. That has to happen at the expense of the individuals who are being incarcerated, who just so happen to be primarily members of communities of color. And so for me, I think this is something that we are doing today that's the right thing. I think it's something that we could be proud about. And I think it is something that we can say, you know what, we came to Albany and did the right thing. Because I'm telling you, if we don't deal with this mass incarceration system that we have in this country, we're going to have some really bad days ahead. And I think the way in which we're moving forward as it relates to the border and the immigrant facilities and how we're tying up private prisons with that, I think is very detrimental to who we are as a country and what we proclaim to be in the world. So I'll be proudly voting aye on this bill, and I want to thank all of those who are voting aye on this bill, and thank you for giving me the time to say a few words.